Are you a passionate business owner or entrepreneur ready to take your message to the world? Do you dream of launching your own podcast but don't know where to start? Introducing my 8-week Start Your Podcast program designed to guide you every step of the way in creating and launching your podcast. In this program, you'll learn the essential skills needed to craft engaging content, record high-quality episodes, and market your podcast effectively to reach your target audience. I will work closely with you, providing personalised guidance and feedback to ensure your podcast stands out in a crowded digital space. But hurry, spots are limited and applications for our upcoming cohorts are closing soon. Don't miss this opportunity to turn your podcast dreams into a reality and launch your podcast this summer. Visit our website donnaeade.com/apply and apply now to secure your spot in our next cohort. Together, let's make your podcasting vision a success. Welcome to Mic Action Podcast. I'm your host, Donna Eade, serial podcaster and mentor, here to guide you through the world of podcasting. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the podcast. I am so excited to have you here today to talk about your podcast launch strategy. So this is really, really important whether you are a seasoned podcaster looking to relaunch your podcast or a newbie planning your very first episode. You are in the right place today because we are going to talk all about it. Let's jump in. So one of the things that I want to say to you before we start is that podcasting is something that a lot of people start and give up on very quickly. The stats are actually quite astonishing. And part of the reason I believe those stats are so high is because people don't look at podcasting as something you need to launch. They just think of it as something they're putting out there. It's another marketing tool. It's like doing an Instagram post. You just put out a podcast episode, but it's really not like that. You need to look at your podcast as if it is a product in your business that you are launching or a service in your business that you are launching. And you need to put just as much effort into getting your podcast off the ground as you do with any other product that you are selling in your business. Because if you want your podcast to be the thing that is going to create leads for you and be somewhere that you can send people to and have that sort of base point as this is your first contact with people, they need to know it's there. And the best way to do that is to have a really good launch for it. So it's really important to actually have a launch process in place. So that is why I just finished up a pod camp for people who are looking to launch their podcast. So we're just wrapping up with that now. I am going to be doing it again in the new year. So if you are interested in getting on the next pod camp, then do let me know. Send me a DM on Instagram. And keep an eye on my Instagram because I will tell you over there when it's ready to sign up for. But it's really important to have a system in place before you even hit record to record an episode, that you've got a system in place ready to launch this podcast so that you can have it shoot out of the gate and make an impact on your business rather than just putting it out there quietly. And this is a mistake that I made, guys. I did not launch my podcast properly. I didn't treat it like it was a product. And I have had very slow growth over that beginning period of my podcast because of that. Now, when I relaunched my podcast, you could see the difference that that made in my numbers. And there was a significant increase in my listenership once I'd relaunched the podcast. So it is evident to me in my back end statistics that launching your podcast is so powerful and so important if you want your podcast to be a consistent generating part of your business. So one of the things that you need to look at before you kind of hone down on your launch strategy is to make sure that you have defined your podcast niche and your target audience for this podcast. So you need to sort of set up your podcast to have a goal in mind. Like, what is the purpose of your podcast? What do you want people to do when they listen to it? Do you want them to communicate with you about it? Is this going to be like a call-in show where you have different topics and people are actually taking part in it, and it's just something that you're doing to raise awareness of things? Is there a driver to it? Is it actually you want people to hear what you've got to say and then you want them to enter your funnel in some way? What is the goal of the podcast? What do you want it to do for your business? And who are the listeners going to be? Who are the people that you want it to appeal to? Because that is going to determine the type of content that you put out in your podcast. Because if it is mums that you are focusing on, then there is a lot of information that you can put out there and talk about and focus on when it comes to mums, that if a dad was listening to it, they would be like, oh, you're talking another language, not interested. So the point of your podcast is to bring in those people that you really want to talk to and repel the people that you don't want to talk to. And that's absolutely fine. You are not for everyone. And that's not to say that you're excluding people. Everybody can listen, obviously, but people who you are aiming it at are going to get more out of it. And you will find that other people do listen. So originally, for any of you OG listeners, you will know that this podcast started out as a podcast focused for the wedding industry. And I had a lot of wedding industry people listen to it, but I also had a lot of business people listen to it because they found value in what I was saying as well. So it didn't repel them. There are other people that might have been repelled because they didn't like the sound of my voice or whatever, but it didn't repel people. It attracted the people to me that liked what I was saying and found value in what I was saying. And amongst those people were the niche that I had kind of designed the podcast for. So make sure that you've got your niche sorted and your goals and objectives sorted before you start, because that is really important and it's going to be a driving factor to what it is that you create and who you're creating it for. The other thing is the significance of creating a content calendar. So one of the reasons I think a lot of podcasts fail before they even really get up and running is because they don't think far enough ahead. Now, I've spoken before on this podcast about how important batching is, and it is certainly important throughout your business. I think for me, it is a peace of mind that it gives me to have the batch done so that I know that if anything goes wrong, if I have a week, because I'm working here on my own and it's just me, if I'm not feeling well one week, I don't have to push myself to work because I've got my stuff batched. So, the things that need to happen, I tend to batch so that they can get done. And I think a lot of people with their podcasts is they're doing it week to week and, something pops up, they don't do it, or they're trying to squeeze it in and it's not as good as it could be. So having a content calendar where you're actually writing out what episodes are coming up and then using batching can really help you with your podcast to ensure that you keep it going. So I cover that a lot more in my Start Your Podcast program. We go through a system of creating and generating your ideas so that you've got a whole year's worth of ideas by the end of the program, and that you know how you're going to batch your items up so that you can make sure that you keep going. So for me, I was really shocked when I found out that actually 90% of people who start a podcast quit after 3 episodes. And that was quite a shocking figure to me. I didn't realize it was that big. And then when I found out that there are actually only about 2.8 million indie podcasts, that was another one that shocked me, because I had been given the figure sort of 4 million. And then it kind of went up to 5 million was the latest one that I saw. But those include every single podcast that exists. So that includes the celebrity podcast, that includes the big media company podcasts, and it includes all the podcasts out there that only have 1 episode. So when you take all of those out, the competition, as it were, the people who are producing a podcast in a similar way to you, where it's just you on your own doing it, that is actually only 2.8 million. And of those, the ones that are actively engaged, the ones that are actually out there producing all the time, is a much smaller number than the numbers that I've been hearing. So there is actually a lot of potential for podcasts that can stick at it. So if you can set yourself up for success with your podcast and really sort of put systems in place to make it work for you, then I think that you can really find some great traction with your podcast. And if you're one of the ones that can stand the test of time, then you are really putting yourself in a great position to have your podcast be a great feeder. I've said it before, I'm on a podcast that is coming out very soon. I think the beginning of December. I guested on a show with Christine Campbell-Rappin, and I said on there that your podcast is your long-tail marketing strategy. It is not a quick fix. So if you're thinking that, it's just going to generate hundreds of leads for you in the first couple of months, it's not the case. You may be an outlier that actually manages to do that. That's great for you. Fantastic. But you don't think of podcasts as instant gratification. These are seeds that you put out that are going to cultivate over time. So when I think of, long-standing podcasts that think of it like that, I think of people like Amy Porterfield, who's had her podcast now for over 10 years, is on episode 600 and something at this point. And she puts out episodes every single week, knowing that the people who listen to her may not become clients of hers for a year, 2 years, 3 years, maybe even longer. She doesn't do it for the instant gratification. She does it to help people, to serve, to show them who she is as an individual, as a business owner, as a teacher, as a mentor, and then people can choose when to buy from her. And that's what I think you need to think about when you are doing your podcast. It's not an instant funnel system. It is not like setting up ads. With ads, you can look at getting much more instant return, but there's a lot of payout that you've got to do for that. Whereas podcasting, you can start for very little money, and it is a long-term thing that you've got to stick with to see the results. So that's something that I just want you to bear in mind when you're thinking about launching your podcast. Now, I touched on batching a moment ago, and I think that is really important as part of your launch that you get a good batch of episodes behind you to start with. So if you pre-record your first 6 episodes, then you're already beating the 90% that fall off because you've got 6 episodes you can upload. So you're already ready to go. Now, what I suggest that you do when you launch is that you let 3 episodes go out on day 1. So I tell my students that should be kind of your trailer / intro. So you can do a trailer for your podcast that is just like the movie trailer, like this is the such and such podcast, this is what it's about, tune in each week to listen to XYZ, and that be a quick trailer that you can put up and have up permanently on your player. But then have a short intro podcast episode, which is just about who you are, what you do, why you've started the podcast, what your aims for the podcast is, what you hope your listeners are going to get out of it, and what they can expect. So 5 to 10 minutes, not a huge episode, just something to get you warmed up and something that's going to let people who listen from day one know what it's all about. Now, the great thing about podcasting is that people will often go back and listen to old episodes. But once you get up in there to like hundreds, once you're in 3 digits, it's highly unlikely they're going to be going back and listening to your very first episode. So don't worry about that so much. But it is great for those people that are coming to you new when you're still under 100 episodes, who may well go and binge listen to a lot of your episodes that might get back to episode 1 to know who you are and what you do. Then I say 2 episodes that are set up the way that you're going to do your podcast going forward. So you have a trailer, yes or no, it's up to you. An intro episode that's kind of 5-10 minutes, and then 2 episodes that give people a good taste of what your podcast is going to be like, how it's structured, and what the themes are going to be. So those 3 episodes would be launched on day 1. And the reason for this is you are hooking in your listeners. So if you just had the intro episode, for example, that's all great. But by the time the next week comes around, people have forgotten about you and forgotten about that episode and aren't necessarily going to hit subscribe just from you telling them what might be coming down the line. But if you drop the intro plus 2 regular episodes, then people will tend to binge listen to it. Oh, it's a brand new podcast. There's 3 episodes. Don't make them too long. The thing with podcasts is they can grow as you get more comfortable with the mic. So my first episodes were kind of 15 minutes-ish. It was a push to get them to 20. And as I have progressed and grown in my podcasting abilities, then I have got the length of time that I want for my episodes. So it is likely that these episodes are going to be slightly shorter anyway, which means that people will listen to all 3 of them. That is something that's really important because it's going to hook them in. It's going to get them listening to what episodes are going to be like. They're going to enjoy it. They're going to want to make sure that they listen to more. Make sure that you tell them to subscribe where they're listening in those episodes. I say do it in every single episode that you do, but make sure for sure in those first 3 episodes that you're saying, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode. Because then what you're doing is you're creating that anticipation. And in that last episode, let them know what's coming next week. Say, we're coming out with a new episode next week. We're going to be talking about XYZ. Make sure you've hit that subscribe button, build that anticipation to bring them back the following week. And then if you've done a batch of 6, you've then got 3 episodes, which is the next 3 weeks sorted. And whilst those 4 weeks are going, so the first launch week and then your following 3 weeks, you have got that time to start batching 2 or 3 episodes at a time so that you can get ahead and stay ahead with your podcasting. And that is going to make it much easier for you and create momentum in your podcast to keep going. Next, we're moving on to one of the most important parts of the launch phase of your podcast, and this is the marketing and promotion. Without marketing and promotion, your podcast is not going to go anywhere and you are going to give up very quickly. So there needs to be some hype built around your podcast. So the first thing that you need to do when it comes to your marketing and promotion is get your branding sorted for your podcast. So whether this is pulling on your business branding or whether you're setting up an entirely new branding just for the podcast, that needs to be thought through and that needs to be solidified before you get going. Now, take a look at the artwork that you see on your podcast players. What is the common themes? How could you stand out? Take a look at what is out there already. And a couple of tips for you is make sure that the writing is big and that there is not too much of it. So I used to have quite a big bit of blurb on my last podcast artwork. And I was like, no, that's too much. Need to reduce it and make it bigger. Remember, people are seeing these very small on their phones. So they are only kind of, thumbnail profile picture size, a bit bigger than that. But, it's not very big. And if you've got writing on there, a lot of writing or small writing, they're not going to be able to read it. And there's absolutely no point to having all of that on there. So be quite big and bold with the words that you use. Make sure that they are big enough to be able to be read. Make sure that the font that you choose is a good readable font. And make sure that when it is small, and if you are doing this on Canva, you can actually decrease the size of the canvas so you can see how big it would be at that, and you can use your phone for a reference against your computer. Sort of, is it around the same sort of size? So you can see how big it will appear and what that actually looks like. How do the colors look? Do you want something that is bold and bright that stands out, or is it more important to you that it sits with your branding colors for your business and you're going to pull those into it? Make sure that if you have a face on there, that is also a decent size, that it can be seen properly. And those are my tips for your artwork, for your podcast. And it can be changed down the line, but if you can get it right first time, then that's great. I think Amy Porterfield has changed her podcast artwork twice that I know of. So, she sort of created it, stuck with it for a very, very long time and updated it maybe a couple of years ago now. And it's been the same ever since. So this is something that really becomes the stamp of your podcast and what your podcast listeners are going to look out for when they're scrolling their new episodes that are available. They'll be looking for that color. They'll be looking for that picture when they're scrolling to see where your new episode is. So you don't want to change it too often. And if you can get it right first time, that is even better. And then it'd just be refreshing, a few years down the line, maybe. One of the other really important marketing elements is what I like to call the hype squad. And this to me is like so key and something that I have been speaking about in my podcamp, something we will cover again in the new year in the podcamp. And that is the creation of a hype squad. So a hype squad is your network and collaborators, the people that support you in business and want to see you succeed. You want to get them on board with promoting your podcast. And you can do this in a number of ways. You can set up a group on Facebook. You can run competitions for people. You can create an email list of hype squatters that you send out emails to. You can give prizes out. There are lots of different things that you can do to encourage the people that are in your network to support you in this launch, but you kind of do need a commitment from them. You kind of need to sort of set the expectations of, this is something that I really want to be successful, and it's only going to be successful if X, Y, and Z happens. And if you can commit to doing X, Y, and Z with me, then I would really love to have you on my hype squad and be part of it. And, I'm going to be running a few competitions to win some prizes and make it fun. And I would love to have you along for that, something along those lines. But one of the things that you need from your hype squad is you need them to share it with their audience, because you want to get as many people listening as possible. So the week that it launches, you want them to share it with everybody that they know, not only on their socials, but also to their email list, because we know that email is really, really impactful when it comes to building that connection with your audience. So the people that are on their email list have gone that one step further than their social media followers. They're a bit more connected. They're a bit more likely to take a recommendation from them. So if you can get them to email their subscribers, then that is just going to give you a better recommendation from them to their audience. And then you also want them to listen to your podcast on the day that it's released. If you can get a good group of hype squatters together listening to your podcast the day it releases, maybe you have a listen party, maybe you actually set up on Zoom, everybody is on mute and they sit there and they listen to each of the episodes with you, and they give you some feedback on the episodes as they go, pointers, things that they liked, things that they didn't, and you have this kind of listen party where you're all listening together, and then get them to rate and review on Apple. If you can get a good number of people subscribing, rating, and writing a review on the day you release your podcast, it is going to do amazing things for you in the algorithm. With podcasting, there isn't an algorithm like there is with social media. So you have a lot of potential within that. And also, Apple doesn't release information on how it decides who gets in the Apple charts and things like that. They don't release that information, so people can't gamify it. But one of the things that we know works well to get you sort of listed and get you in front of people and push you higher is having a lot of people listening to you, a lot of people liking what you're putting out there, a lot of people leaving comments on what you're doing. So if you can get a lot of people doing that on day one, that is going to really help to push your podcast out to more listeners on day one. So a hype squad is absolutely key to helping you promote and market your podcast. Obviously, there are a lot of things that I talk about within the podcamp about launching and what you need to do before you get to launch day. So if you want to come and join me in that, then definitely send me a message on Instagram, Donna_Eid_, just type podcamp, and I will make sure I put you on the list to let you know when the doors are open for registration for the January cohort of the podcamp. So let me know about that, and we will talk through all of the things to do in the lead up to releasing your podcast. But on launch day, you want to make sure that you are promoting it everywhere. So you want to make sure that you are on your social media, doing lives, talking to other people, going on lives with other people. You know, who can you get who is part of your hype squad to let you come on live on their Instagram with them to talk about your podcast and how excited you are? You want to be back to back with with interviews on that day on social media, talking to people, and your hype squad is going to come in there. That would be really great opportunity for you to personally reach out after your pod squad's been talking about you for a few weeks, for you to come on and say, hey guys, it's live today. I would love to know what you think about it. Go and listen, rate it and review it. Leave your comments for me so that I know what you like and I can produce more of it for you, and just hype it up. So that is really, really important, to make sure that you are out there on the day and for the next 7 days and permanently. You know, you always want to be promoting it, but that first week is so important, and day one is the most important to get as many people listening as possible. Get your hype squad on it, get them sharing it, get them emailing about it, you know, have that buzz around your podcast on day one. Then going forward, you need to have a consistent schedule. You need to be showing up same time, same place every week so people can rely on that. It builds your authority with them and builds your trust to know that you're going to be there and you're going to show up. So this is why batching is so, so important, because like I said earlier, if you get ill, something goes wrong, you know, the whole week's falling apart, your podcast is taken care of because you've batched it. So really, really important to do that. And then you need to obviously keep an eye on your data. You know, you need to be sharing things that people can download for free, whatever your freebie is, however you want them to connect. Make sure you're using your podcast as a call to action for your audience to bring them into your world and start working with them. So make sure that when they are connecting to you through your podcast, that you've actually got them tagged in your back end, that that's where they came from. Then you're going to be able to tell some really interesting data. So for me, when I first launched my podcast about a year on, I looked at the data in my CRM system, and it showed me that half of my email subscribers were on my email list because they wanted to hear about the podcast. They wanted the updates for the podcast, or they downloaded something from my podcast. So those are the only two reasons they got tagged in that way, was because they either downloaded a freebie that I was talking about on the podcast, or they signed up to my newsletter. And that was 50% of my email list. So that was extraordinary to me. And that was about a year after that I looked at that data. But if you aren't tagging people in that way in your CRM system from the start, you're going to be missing that valuable data and being able to know. And then, of course, you've got your podcast specific data, which is going to show you how many downloads you're getting, the listenership and what that looks like. So these are numbers that you need to keep an eye on. You obviously want to see growth. I wouldn't give too much weight to those numbers in respect of feeling like you're not doing enough or you haven't got enough, because people can listen to your podcast without downloading it. And most of the platforms count downloads. So you could have a lot more listeners than you have downloads. Others do collect listenership or plays on podcasts, but it is all spread out all over the different platforms. There is no one central hub for that. So it is difficult to tell sometimes how many podcast listens you're actually getting. So use it as a metric to gauge growth. So if those numbers are increasing, then you're all good. If they're stagnating, what can you do to boost them? And make sure that you are reviewing that on a regular basis. So guys, that is it for this episode. I hope you have found that useful. I really enjoyed doing the podcamp with the guys this week. So if you want in on that next one, then do DM me over on Instagram with podcamp, and I'll make sure that you get to know about the next one. If you are going to start a podcast, please make sure that you have a launch plan in place before you hit that publish button. It takes time to launch a podcast. Well, there are lots of programs out there and people saying, I can get you started with a podcast in 14 days. Yeah, maybe you can get a podcast started in 14 days, but I promise you, if you do it in 14 days and hit that publish button, you are not going to see the best success you can with it. And it is more likely that you are going to stop before you really get started. So if you want to start a podcast, I would urge you to take it seriously as a marketing tool in your business that deserves time and attention to get the best out of it. So that is it for this week, guys. I hope you will join me next week, and I am going to do what I preach and ask you to please leave a review on Apple Podcasts for this episode. Apple Podcasts is linked on my Instagram, so you can go over there if you're not sure how to access it. If you are on Android, I know that you guys can't do that. Please come over to Good Pods and leave me a rating and review and follow me over there, because that is more of a social podcast platform, which I really enjoy. So if you're an Android user, would love to see you over on Good Pods. And if you are an Apple user, please go and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you have access to Apple Podcasts anywhere, then please go and do that for me. I would be eternally grateful to you. Until next week, guys, I'll see you in the next one. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Mike Action podcast and are enjoying the series so far. If you are, make sure to drop a review where you listen and share it with a friend. Until next time.